another wave of economic expansion that's going to go impact these countries. And so my point I'm making out here, since many of you are representing other countries right now, when you go back, you got to focus on every country investing a reasonable amount of their GDP or their dollars into research and development so that this economic wave of expansion becomes waves of economic expansion that start in different countries and touch everybody else, and the world as a whole would be a much better place to live. So when we sit here and talk about getting rid of poverty in Africa, clean water for India, clean water for China, electricity for all, this all happens because we as a nation or we as a society have the ability to pay for these things. And we can't pay for these things unless we create wealth, we generate employment, right? And I'm making a case. It is not as strong a case as I would in writing a paper, but I hope I just managed to kind of semi-convince you so that over dinner you can just have this conversation, that that's the right thing to do. So I talked about the U.S. investment in ICT, which is about circa 1957, 1960. And 1957 is a culture shock, and it was not a culture shock, it was literally a shock that the U.S. had. Anybody remember 1957? What happened? Sputnik. No kidding, right? Sputnik went up, and we were caught sleeping. In fact, we were not only caught sleeping, and we refused to admit we were sleeping, we were saying, geez, how did we not know? We thought we were ahead of these people, right? And that was the creation of DARPA, which then led to a whole lot of big investments in the internet and a whole lot of technologies like that, right, including the stealth planes. But that's not the topic of today's conversation. But before 1957, something very important happened. Something very important happened in 1945. Does anybody remember? What happened in 1945? Well, 1945 approximately was the end of World War II, right? If you look at the economic development in the U.S. pre-1945, take like 50 years pre-1945 and then take 50 years post-1945, there will be no doubt in your mind that post-1945 we've had an amazing growth in our economy. We have dominated the world in every which way based on our economic development. This economic development happened for many, many reasons, but one of the most important reasons that I think this is attributable to is the notion of the Great American Research University. So in 1945, Vannevar Bush, who at that time was a science advisor to President Roosevelt. So Roosevelt, in one of his, bright moments or so, basically asked of his science advisor, saying, look, we are spending a lot of money, and at that point, I think it was like 10 or 20 million dollars in research for the whole country. We are spending a lot of money on this wartime research because we were trying to fight World War II, and we had a lot of needs in terms of technology, and a lot of great technology was created. Is it not possible to use this technology in peace times for the welfare of everybody else, like normal people and the growth of society? And Vannevar Bush, in return, wrote this great paper, which if you get a chance, you should read it. It's called Science, the Endless Frontier, in which he argued that it was not only possible to do it, but it was imperative we do it. And a consequence of that argument was a significant investment in American universities by the federal government, right? So the MITs, the Stanfords, the Carnegie Mellons, the University of Illinois, the Washington State, and none of these places existed in their present form at that time. And that was the creation of the American Research University. So you're saying, this jerk is just standing up here as a university dean trying to tell us to create other universities. I'm not telling you that, but I'm kind of telling you that. So it was not just the creation of the American Research University. It was in tandem with it creating policies like the Bayh-Dole Act, for example, creating policies where the faculty member had consulting privileges, where the government mandated that government-funded research at a university had to be commercialized, or there should be an open-door policy, that the world within the U.S. had to be flat. And all of this led to a significant economic development cycle out here. So you might argue with me, but let me just pose one question to you. So if you look at, for example, let's just take India, China, EU, and I'm putting all EU together. I don't mean to be insulting about this, but let's just think of it that way, and the U.S. Can you name me one company in the U.S. that, in your mind, came out of university research directly? university research funded by the government. Cisco, how about Google? $155 billion market cap right now. Name me one company in India, China, EU. You cannot, right? I have looked around. It is not easy. So what this tells you is that even though whatever policy EU has been following, it kind of works, but they have not been able to generate wealth at a pace at which the US has generated wealth. And it has done so because it has integrated investment in research at a university, investment in research at companies through SBIRs, STTRs, and also other big programs where big companies like AT&T, for example, I don't know about today, we used to have defense programs. Big companies like Cisco have a defense side of their house which focuses on defense and government business, right? And we have done this, I think, partly by accident, but partly by design. But whatever we have done is today, in my mind, an existence proof of a success model. And the reason I'm making this case so passionately is because I believe if countries have to become a part of this flat global society and partners in creating multiple waves of economic development, they have to think, modified of course for their own culture and their own politics, the notion of an American research university and the policies that surround it, the government policies that surround it, especially in the context of ICT, and create that in their own countries. And right now I can tell you that I work a lot with many countries. I have established campuses in many countries. There is no country that comes even close to the US in terms of the open atmosphere we have created in terms of innovation, in terms of experimentation, in terms of physical infrastructure, in terms of tech transfer, in terms of an ecosystem where the venture capitalists walk into a university, where faculty members like me go work for AT&T for 6 months, DARPA for 6 months, come back, maybe Atlantic Council for 6 months, and then come back, and then are faculty members again. So there is a whole flow that is happening, and this flow causes a lot of good things to happen. Right? And this happens across the board, so the American Research University is not focused on ICT. That's just one of the areas. But I have picked ICT partly because Phil said, hey, this is what you're going to do, partly because I believe in it, right? So let me just make one more point where I think we need a significant input from multiple governments. So let's assume ICT is as well developed as it is. The problem with ICT today is these companies that I just named were companies that 10, 15 years ago were had goals. For example, Microsoft, the goal was to create the operating system of the future. If you look where we are today, I don't think we need one more operating system. I don't think we need one more switch and router, right? And I'm afraid that many countries would become very inward looking and say, oh, we should not buy American this or British that or French that. We need to create all of these technologies in-house, and if they did that, that'd be a mistake. That'd be a waste of resources. I think the next layer of impact is going to be in deploying ICT technologies and using them effectively for better governance, for example, like e-government enterprises. For example, enabling companies, making healthcare better, understanding the next generation of biotechnology enabled by ICT, and what drugs can we discover, right? And this is an important point because most of these infrastructure companies basically exist in the EU and in the US. They don't exist in India, they don't exist in China. Most of the companies in India and China and even Japan for many, many reasons are more like non-infrastructure oriented, right? So that's an actually important point. Secondly, so let's assume this infrastructure exists. We have a problem now, and the problem is securing this infrastructure. I hope you realize that you are so dependent on ICT that if our infrastructure, let's say our internet fell apart for 24 hours, the whole banking infrastructure would crumble. So if you think that you have seen a crisis in the last 9 months, the subprime mortgage crisis, as somebody, I think it was Reagan who said, you ain't seen nothing yet, right? So that's the way I look at it. If the internet were to fall apart for a day or two, our whole banking infrastructure would crumble, our defense infrastructure would go crazy, people would have bad thoughts in ways that they have not had. So security becomes a really, really important issue. Now, security is one of these issues that is not a single country issue. Even if the U.S. had all the money in the world and they could fix their U.S. system and make it totally secure,